Okay, so I am going to talk about the replication update transaction. There are, okay, let's look at the scope. So basically, the update transaction is the one that modifies any of the files or directories. So there are like three types generally. You have data, metadata, and directory operations. So data and metadata operations are like so data operations are the ones that change data, like write, truncate, allocate, discard, these kind of operations. Metadata ones are like changing permission, changing some m time, those kinds of things. Directory operations are like mknode, create, rename, soft link, those kinds of operations. So we will see the normal transaction flow, and then what are the optimization done to reduce the network communication to make them a bit faster over the years. So this is like the generic flow in any update transaction is there are like 5 stages. So one is locking, to make sure that you are the only client that is actually doing the operation on the file. Then there is like pre-operation, which is like doing the etc. So these operations actually depend on the earlier sessions actually. So locking and unlocking depend on the lock session we did, the inode LK and entry LK. So for data and metadata, it will be inode LK. For directory operations, it will be entry LK. But yeah, these two are going to be in that. And pre-op and post-op are going to be based on exatrop. This is something that I've talked about in the earlier sessions. Like even in the previous session, I explained what is an exatrop and how you pass an array and you can increment the value in that external attribute. So these pre-op and post-op are for that. And op is your actual operation, which is like write or truncate or set attr, set exatter, or rename, these kinds of things. So these are like okay, there are 5 stages. Oh my god. So there are like 5 stages. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. Okay, so I will go right into the code from now itself. So before like diving into the code, I'll just try to explain and like show how this happens. Okay. Is this font visible?
Yes.
Cool. So we will enable profile just to see this. Okay. So now let's do an operation like writing more. Okay. So we can see that one write has come and 2 inode LKs and 2 exatraps have come. So the locking and unlocking will be denoted by the inode LK because the write is based on an FD, which is like on a file descriptor. You will see that variant of inode LK. Whereas exatrop also, like it is FD based exatrop, but that is also one for pre-op and one for post-op. So that's why you see 2 here in both of them. So you can see like 5 operations over the network right here. Okay. So similarly, if we do, let's say, touch B, we will see that there is an entry LK, 2 entry LKs. Then Where is the entry node? Oh, we did a create, right? Create. So create is also there. The extended drop operations you won't see here because there is some optimization that is going on. That we will talk about a bit later. You can actually observe this optimization even in the data transaction. Let's say we are doing a DD of 100 MB, which will have a lot of write operations. Like there were 800 operations, but the exact drops are still low. If you can see this one and this one. Okay, so the one happened for truncate and the FX drop and F500 LKs, right? You are still only seeing 2, even though the number of writes are 800. So this is also an optimization where if a file already has a lock on the same client, you try to reuse the locks and the external, like the pre-op, post-op phases, right? They'll be reused. So we'll also talk about that one. Okay. Yeah. So let's now look at the code. So the code is in this AFR transaction.c in AFR translator. So this is like a transaction framework that can be used by any operation. What we will do first is we'll look at how something like let's say a truncate operation would use this transaction framework, and then we will dive into what the actual transaction is doing. Okay. The inode write, which is like the operations that change the inode in some way, both data and metadata. The code for that is in inode write.c. So what happens is these are like initialization of the local variables that are needed for this operation, and these are like the file argument, the ftruncate arguments, you can say. This is like till which offset you have to do the truncation. So generally, if you don't give any operation, it is still 0th offset. So basically, your file would be zeroed out. Otherwise, you can specify some offset basically. Okay, so these are like your the transaction data that you need to say, like for the transaction to wind to the lower translator, which function to call. For the transaction to do the unwind from the AFR translator, which function to call. And this is like the start and length are a way to tell from what place to what place we need the lock. Since the truncation is going to modify data from the offset that we mentioned till the end of file. End of file is like infinity. So you set the length to 0. 0 is generally length 0 is like treated as infinity. It gets transformed somewhere to become a long max minus 1, but this is the notation. Okay, so then once that happens, it calls into AFR transaction. So this is like your entry point into the transaction framework. But before that, we'll just check what happens in wind and unwind. So as you can imagine, it is basically just doing a bare bones stack wind to your lower translator, providing the callback. Like once the response comes from the lower translator, this one will get called. Okay, and this again is a common call which eventually call into transaction residue. Okay. So once like because AFR is a cluster translator which will have like multiple subvolumes. Like for example, if it is a replica 3, you will have 3 subvolumes. So essentially, this ftruncate wind would be called thrice in a normal scenario, and for each response, you will call this inode write CBK, which will do some gathering of the responses. It is basically going to save all the which subvolume or which the child gave what response. It will store all of that. Once it completes, it will essentially call some finalize, in which some FOP will do something extra. But once that is done, it will call into transaction framework again. So this is how the actual FOP and the transaction framework interact. So the initially, when your parent translator, which generally is DHT, when that so this is like your FOPs array, which I'm using this, the parent translator will actually call your whatever is the operation. In this case, it's a truncate. So first it will enter this, it will fill up all your transaction information, call the transaction, and at some point it will call wind and unwind. Unwind also you can see, it is going to just do the unwind to the parent translator. Okay. So yeah, the transaction framework will call into the FOP layer again, the inode write layer rather, which will do winding and it may do unwind at the end. So yeah, this is the information that gets populated at the start of the transaction. All right, now let's go into the transaction framework. As we've been discussing, there are 5 stages, and because there are a lot of optimizations in the first pass through, I'll only consider the unoptimized cases where all 5 stages get executed. Let's go into transaction. These are before executing the actual transaction, it will check whether the quorum etc. are all there. If they are not there, it can directly fail the operation without even starting the operation. So now let's look at the locking part. So for any operation, you need to take some sort of a lock. So this function actually determines what are the locks going to be. So as you might imagine, there are 2 types of locks, inode LK and entry LK. So you will have a data transaction and metadata transaction taking inode lock, and entry transaction apart from rename transaction is going to have only 1 lock, but rename and RMDIR I think have multiple locks. So they are going to have different codes. So we will first look at the inode locking part. So we are basically specifying the, if it is an FD based operation, it's the FD, otherwise it's going to be an LOC. Then it will tell what all subvolumes you want to take a lock on. So that basically specifies your locking part, on what inodes you are basically going to do the lock. Since most of the operations only operate on 1 inode, it's generally just 1 inode LK. Okay. The entry transaction is a little bit interesting because when you do a rename, you are essentially changing 2 directories, the source directory and the destination directory. So in that case, you may need 2 locks. The other case is RMDIR. RMDIR, when you are trying to delete a directory, you don't want any. So when you are deleting a directory, you are essentially changing the parent of the directory. So wait, let me just. This is coming from the first. Okay. Now let's say we do this. Okay. when we do d1 slash a to d2 slash b, we are essentially changing both d1 and d2. That is the first case. When you are doing an RMDIR of d1, you are basically changing the parent, the current directory rather. Like, you know, that you are changing d, but you also need to make sure that while you are doing this RMDIR d1, nobody in parallel tries to create some entries inside d1. Okay, does that make sense? Is that clear?
Yes. But one question is like, what if they are trying to create D3 or something? That's not relevant to D1, right? So we can allow that.
So that can be allowed. So the two locks in case of RMDIR are inside D, there will be a lock for D1, and inside D1 there will be a lock for null, which means the entire directory. So if somebody else tries to create another directory D3 in D, that is a separate lock, so they are not conflicting. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay. All right. So now let's see that same part in code. So these are all like your operations on location. I don't know if you guys remember this one. So location basically has, this is just for debugging purposes mostly, but the name and the inode and the parent directory. So either parent directory and name are important, or inode is important generally. In the entry operation cases, since you are trying to create this inode, parent directory and name are important. Okay, so GFID corresponds to this inode GFID. Pair GFID is like parent GFID, which is the GFID of this parent. So in this location, so when we are trying to do this entry lock key, right? You're basically creating the yeah. So you're basically creating the base name here, and the location that you want to take, like the same location. Basically, the parent, the full LOC is going to be copied here. Okay, and LOC base name also gets copied there. Okay. So you're basically trying to add it into a list. So I think at the max two can be taken on 3. Okay, it has to be less than 3. Okay. So the number of locks at the moment, the maximum allowed locks are 2. Okay, in case of rename and RMDIR. Okay, so in case of RMDIR, in case of rename, we also need to add the new parent LOC is the destination parent LOC, and then new base name is the new, like in this case, if you look at this one, in rename, this new parent LOC is the D2, and new base name is this B, and this old one, this parent LOC is D1, and this base name is A. Okay. Similarly, in case of this directory, RMDIR, one second. Okay. Oh, there are 3 possibilities then. 1, 2. 1 second. Parent LOC. Oh, there is a third one which is similar to this. Okay. Oh, then there are 3 possibilities. Okay, so when you are trying to do, okay, this I think I have to show. But MV doesn't do it that way. Okay, let me try it this way. When you do touch A and touch B, you have A and B, right? Now if you do MV and B, so this B is deleted and A gets replaced onto this one, right? Similarly, if for directories also rename is allowed, and if the destination directory is empty, it will override. Like using MV, I can't do this operation, I think, because if you do MVB and D2, it will go inside D2. Okay, but the rename syscall allows. Uh, so yeah, so this is the part. Like if new path already exists, it will be atomically replaced, so that there is no point at which another process attempting to access new path will find the missing. Okay. There is some directory can specify directory in the new not exist. Specify. Yeah. So this is the important part. So if old path can specify a directory, in this case, new path must either not exist or it must specify an empty directory. So if there is an empty directory, it will rename. Otherwise, we will get E not empty. E not empty. Or we see E not empty anywhere. Yeah. So if new path is a non-empty directory, then it will get rename is not allowed. But otherwise, the rename is allowed. The system call this is. But I don't think using MV we can simulate that case. That's why I'm trying to explain it this way. Anyway, so if the destination path exists and it's a directory, then you also need to do the same operation that you are same log that you are trying to take for rmdir, where you don't want any new entries to be created until this rename completes, so that you will either get e not empty or the rename actually happens correctly. Was that confusing? Are there any doubts? Hello? Hello?
Did not get it completely, but maybe.
No, this is important. You ask questions.
Okay, can you go back? I missed you in the part where you said that in that man to rename, right? You said it will atomically create. Can you go to the page?
Yeah. So basically, rename is supposed to do this rename in such a way that once the rename completes, you can't. I mean, it's atomic. There will never be a position where you have both the old and the new names appearing. That's what.
Got it. But what about deletion? Like say I want to move D1. Okay, so whenever we are moving something to a directory, that means it will be going inside the directory.
No. Yeah, so that is the point that I wanted to clarify. So mv the command, if you give like this, right, it will move this B inside D2.
Yes.
But the rename system call, if you do B and D2, it will try to delete this one.
Okay, delete the directory.
Is there a... Oh, okay, there is a... Let me see if this works. What is this one? Rename will rename the string by replacing the first occurrence of name by replacement. Okay, I don't think it is that. Okay, this is a different one. Right? I can probably do one thing. I did not expect this. I am sorry about this, but let's do it like this only.
That's fine.
I think this should be enough. Now, if we check touch A, B, not slash. There will be a rename somewhere. Okay, so it has done just rename, right? And you have like A renamed with B. Okay. Now let's do B3 and okay, sorry. Okay, now let's do A and B. Okay.
Okay.
So now if we do the same, you are seeing that it is successful, right?
Yes.
And if we do LSB, it's not in, like the A did not go inside B. So it will do it, the rename system call treats it just like MV treats file.
Got it.
Did that make sense? Okay.
Got it. That means that A's content will be there, but
yeah. Oh yeah, so that would have been better. Wait, inkable A B LS minus I A B. So A is like some 743, B is 225, right? 743 will become B, okay? Okay.
Yeah, got it.
Now, but let's say we create some file inside B. Okay. This is empty directory, but the destination directory has some file now, right? Now, if we try to do this one, okay, so it is basically failing, right? So it did not do this. What is this? This rename basically. And if you do LSB, the file is still there. So this is something that I wanted to highlight. So basically, when you are trying to do a rename from A to B, if there is a parallel creation operation inside B, that will lead to conflicts, right?
Got it.
That's why you need to take a lock inside B also. Same thing with RMDIR also. RMDIR B also will fail. Okay. Because there are files inside B. So whenever you are trying to like RMDIR B is basically changing this directory D, but we don't want anybody to change this directory also while this RMDIR is happening. So we need extra locks for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, got it.
Cool. So okay, since there are multiple locks, okay, so this I think you might have seen in like operating systems courses. When you are taking multiple locks, they need to be ordered so that you don't run into deadlocks, right? This part I think you guys probably know, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the reason why we are doing the queue sort. So the locking part is understood by everybody?
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, so I will try to also touch upon the unlock. I think unlock is probably easier now. It's basically you already have all the locks that you have taken in the lock, so you keep doing the lock wind with unlocking. Okay, so this may seem a little bit why are we doing all this kind of thing? Why is it not like a while loop? But the is a little bit it's like an implementation detail basically. So the thing is, if you have 3 locks and 3 subvolumes, like in replica 3, you are basically going to send 9 unlocks, right? 9 locks and 9 unlocks in total. Does that make sense? So yeah, so basically it is the lock-in number is the structure number, the ones that we have populated. Child index is the like your replica subvolume 0, 1 or 2 in case of 3. So based on that, it is going to send to that respective brick for that respective lock. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So this part, like unlock, is actually easy. The locking part, there is one more thing that we need to cover that we will see. Okay, so here it's still like, you know, population of the locking is done. Okay, the actual operation of locking is not yet done. So let's look at that. So there is concept of eager lock which will do optimizations. For now, let's not go into that because we are going through the unoptimized case. So this LK owner is the owner of that lock. This is something that we covered in lock session. Each lock has an owner. So based on that, it will try to do a lock or an unlock. Okay. So before actually sending out the lock, you have to set this lock owner. Now we will take a lock. Okay. Yeah. So locking happens optimistically in the sense that you kind of assume that like, you know, conflicting operations are not there and try to send a lock in parallel. Okay. But if you send, okay, so this is again something we can explain. Okay. So there is brick 1 and there is brick 2 and brick 3. And let's say there are 3 clients. C1, C2, C3. Okay. Generally, this C1, C2, C3 are probably separate machines, and brick 1, brick 2, brick 3 are separate machines, right? Now, if they are trying to take locks in parallel, C1, C2, and C3, okay, they have to send 3 messages. Okay, let's take a single lock case only to make it a bit easier to understand. It has to send the same lock to this, and this. Similarly, this has to send a lock to this, and similarly like this 3, right? Now the order at which these locks appear on B1 may not be same. Like on B1, you may get the lock from C1 first, C2 next, and C3 next. But on B2, you may get C2 first, then C1, and then C3. On B3, you may get the lock request from C3 first and C2 next, and then C1 maybe. Okay. So there is no guarantee that the locks, order of locks that you get on that brick would be same. Is this clear?
Yeah.
Shriram, are you clear?
Yeah, I'm clear.
Okay. So the reason why I'm saying this is like if you send blocking locks directly, okay, you can't send them in parallel because there will be deadlocks. Because C1 at B1 maybe it will grant C1 first, and at B2 it may grant C2 first, and like B1 will be waiting for C2. Like this client will only get like one blocking lock accepted, and the other ones will be blocking, and vice versa. Like, you know, they will be waiting for conflict, like, you know, deadlock. Like let's just take these two, C1 and C2. Like on B1, C1 may get acquired first. On B2, C2 may get acquired first. And on C1 is waiting for the lock from C1 to be acquired here. And on C2, C2 is waiting for the lock to be acquired on B1. And this is like a deadlock. So to prevent that, you first send non-blocking locks in parallel. Okay. This part is clear?
Yeah.
So basically, if you want to do the operation, you basically need locks on all the bricks. Okay. But because there are like multiple bricks are involved, you need to make sure that there should not be any deadlocks. So one way to do it is to send like everybody has to send it in the same order. Like C1 will send first to B1, then to B2, then to B3. Similarly, C2 will send first to B1, then next to B2, then next to B3, like serially. So if the latency between the clients and the brick key is, let's say, around 1 millisecond, now to complete the operation, you will take 3 milliseconds, because you are waiting for the lock to be acquired once, then the next one, then the next one. It's like a summation. Okay. But since you are in most of the cases, when you try to take a lock, nobody else is trying to write to the same file. What you will do is, you can try to send them in parallel, but to avoid deadlocks, you will send non-blocking locks. Okay. So what will happen is C1, C2, C3, all of them, let's say, try to take non-blocking locks. Okay. If this scenario we discussed before, where on B1, C1 got granted first, and on B2, C2 got granted first, the next lock will get a E again error number, which is like a try again. Okay. So then you know that there are conflicting operations going on. Then you will resort to your slow inode lock, which is like one, then next, then next. Everybody will do unlocks of their partial locks, and then it will do, everybody will try to take like, blocking locks in that same order. Otherwise, let's say in your normal case, only one client would be writing generally. Okay, so when it tries to take parallel locks in 1 millisecond, you will get all of the locks as successful. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So that is the reason for why we try first non-blocking lock. If the non-blocking lock fails, then you go to your blocking lock in a serial manner. Okay, so this reduces the latency. Okay, so now we will see the same thing in code. So in the non-blocking phase, it is basically okay. So this part is the same thing as we discussed before. But this is, I think, say, like, it's a for loop. You are basically sending locks to everybody. Okay, this internal lock point actually, like, based on whether it's a data, metadata, or entry, it will do the necessary lock. Okay, if it is like data metadata, it will do inode lock, and if it is entry, it will do entry lock. And like the entry transaction or rename transaction, it will do entry locks. Okay. So this is again, like, everything will be call and callback. Once the operation is done, it will come here, and if it is like like operation is successful, it will be 0. Otherwise, there will be an error. Okay. Then, like, whatever needs to be called, like, there is a concept called lock CDK, which I will come here. Yeah, so we are setting it here. Okay, so after the locking operation successful or not successful, it will come here. If the locks are completely successful, you are done with the locking phase of the transaction. Otherwise, you have to go to the blocking phase of the transaction. Okay, in blocking lock, as you may imagine, it will start with the index 0 first. Okay, it's like the index actually. Every time you take a lock, it will go to the next lock. Basically, this internal lock point is the same one, which will do it based on inode lock or entry lock. But after this one, it will go to the next one. Like, we started with 0. Now it will be like the cookie plus 1. Okay, it will keep going to the next brick until the locking is successful. Okay. But the once you are done, it will again call the lock CDK. At some point, all bricks will be done, and it will call lock underscore. Where is that code? Okay, so this is in lock blocking only. So it will say, like, the LK expected count is attempted count, all of this. Yeah, so in this case it will be this one. Okay, so this is your okay, so this is the success case where the blocking lock is successful, and you will go to the whatever is the callback specified. This is the unsuccessful case. Okay, in which case you will have to unlock the partial locks, and you have to say that the locking was unsuccessful. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is your callback basically. Now the locking phase is done. We have also covered the unlock phase. Now we will look at the pre-op and post-op. Okay. So let's look at the pre-op. Okay. Pre-op is that XR drop. And actually put a breakpoint, and I'll try to show it that way. We'll put a breakpoint in this one, then I'll explain. Okay. I don't want to show this one. All right, so we got a breakpoint here. Okay. Do you guys see this marking? Because it's a data operation, as I explained in the last session, the first 8 bytes would actually change. Okay, first 4 bytes, first 8 hex digits, they will change. So it has marked this one as 1. Okay, we can do continue, and you can see the same thing. The marking is gone now. Okay, I showed it on only one brick, but the same thing happens on all the bricks basically. So this is what pre-op does generally. If it is data operation, first 8 hex digits. If it is metadata, next 8. If it is directory, the ones after. Okay, so generally that's what happens. Is this clear? Hello? Okay. All right, I think I'll just complete this part also. Then we can take a look at this from next time onwards. Okay. So let's look at what this changelog do does. It will prepare the changelog, which is like what markings to be done. In this case, we have to populate the X data with +1. Okay. So where are you? I think it's probably even before it does. 1 second. So here. So basically it is saying you do +1 on the dirty with this data operation will be 0, metadata operation will be 1, entry operation will be 2. So basically it denotes whether it's the first 8 hex digits, next 8 hex digits, or the last ones. And it will do a changelog do. which is going to do nothing but your stack winding this exadrop operation to all your children. And once this operation is complete, you will get this call back. And whatever is your change log resume, that function will be called. So we can actually see this is your change log resume basically. Okay. So in pre-op, if once that pre-op completes, it will go to your perform fork, which is your actual truncate fork, the one that we are looking at. And you will see that, okay, so these ones are all like, optimizations related. So what it will do is it will do the actual fork, and now this dot wind and dot unwind will start becoming getting called. Okay, yeah. So this is something that we have seen, right? Like f truncate wind. So this got populated here. Okay, so it is going to call that f truncate wind or whichever fork it is. Then, as we discussed last time, it will eventually call transaction resume, transaction done. One second. Yeah, it will call transaction resume. So basically, it will perform the operation. It will collect all your responses. Then it will call transaction resume. Okay. In this transaction resume, it will try to decide whether the operation is successful or failed. And based on that, it will either do it will have to do a post-op. Okay. In this post-op, it again has to figure out whether it has to do a -1 for the dirty or it has to do pending markers. Okay. This part is a little bit tricky because of all these optimizations. So we'll try to just look at the unoptimized bits. Okay, it's the same thing. Yeah, so there will be a -1 somewhere. Okay, so in case of failures, it has to mark on some other brick key that there is pending marking. Otherwise, it has to do a -1 basically. I'm trying to see where that key is. Right? Need under it's here. If in case of a full success, it will mark -1. Otherwise, it will mark a +1 on the bricks that it failed. And then it will call the same function, change log do, which will do again the post-op, which is the etc. Then it will essentially call your unlock phase. So this is something that we have discussed already at the time of locking. But now we will try to see what I'll try to like give a demo of what is happening here. Okay, what is the meaning of this -1 and 0, and what is the meaning of this pending of 1? Okay, so I think -1 is probably simpler to understand because we have seen already, like once the operation is complete, that +1 has become 0. So basically we are saying you do an exadrop with -1 on this key. So what it will do is there was already 0001. It will do add -1 and it will become 0. Now we can do something else. If we kill this PID, okay. So now you will see a little, so it's the same thing, right? Dirty marking has happened. Now we'll put a breakpoint here. So your operation has completed. Now what will happen is change log post stop done. We will put a breakpoint in the callback. Okay. So now you will see different markers. You will see that because this brick 0 is down, there is a pending marking of +1 on this brick 0. Okay. So you can see that code right here. On pending of 0, okay, pending of 0, which is like your client 0, there is a marking of 1. Okay, so that's what has happened. All right. So this is like your unoptimized case of the run through of the full transaction.